My husband could find fault in air itself. That's what I started thinking around month 7 of what I privately called the criticism era. Thorn Verelian had always been particular, but somewhere along the way particular had evolved into impossible. "You're chopping the onions wrong," he'd say, standing behind me in our kitchen. "The pieces are uneven. It affects cooking time. You're loading the dishwasher inefficiently. We've discussed optimal placement. Your laugh is too loud when we have guests over. It draws unnecessary attention." Even my breathing bothered him. One night he shook me awake at 2 a.m. "You breathe heavily when you sleep," he said, his face shadowed in the darkness. "It's disruptive." I'd stared at him, half asleep, wondering if this was actually happening. "You want me to breathe quieter?" "I'm just saying you should be more aware of it." How does someone become aware of their breathing while unconscious? I didn't ask. I'd learned that questions led to lectures about how I was defensive and resistant to improvement. So I stopped asking. I stopped defending. I stopped engaging. And I started building something he would never see coming. I found the notebook by accident. I was looking for our insurance papers in Thorn's home office when I pulled open the wrong drawer. There, beneath a stack of financial statements, was a black leather notebook with gold-edged pages. The cover had no label, but something made me open it. The first page read, "Improvement Ledger Alysindra Vale Verelian." My full name, written like a file title. I flipped through the pages, my hands starting to shake. Every page was dated. Every entry was a complaint about me, formatted like a performance review. April 3rd, kitchen efficiency, 4 out of 10. Took 47 minutes to prepare dinner. Optimal time should be 35 minutes. April 8th, social presentation, 6 out of 10. Outfit choice at Henderson party was adequate but unremarkable. April 15th, household management, 5/10. Failed to notice living room lamp needed new bulb until I pointed it out. There were hundreds of entries. Months and months of my life reduced to scores and criticisms, like I was an employee being evaluated rather than his wife. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. But I didn't cry. Something else was happening inside me, something colder and sharper than tears. I took a photo of every page with my phone, put the notebook back exactly where I'd found it, and closed the drawer. Our friends started noticing around that same time. We were at dinner with Marcus and Serena, a couple we'd known for years. I'd just finished telling a story about a strange customer at the grocery store when Thorn interrupted. "You're telling it wrong," he said. "The man asked about organic vegetables first, then mentioned his diet. You're confusing the sequence." "Does the sequence really matter?" Marcus asked carefully. "Accuracy matters," Thorn replied. "I'm just helping Alysindra communicate more effectively." Serena caught my eye across the table. Her expression said everything her mouth couldn't. "Is he always like this now?" "Yes," I wanted to say. "Every single day." After dinner, Serena pulled me aside. "Ally, is everything okay? Thorn seems different lately." "He's fine," I said automatically. "He just likes things done properly. There's a difference between having standards and controlling every word you say." I appreciated her concern, but what could I tell her? That my husband graded my performance like a manager? That he kept a literal ledger of my failures? "He's just trying to motivate me to be better," I said, repeating Thorn's own words. Serena didn't look convinced, but she let it go. I stopped responding around May. Not in obvious ways. I still answered when Thorn spoke to me. I still made dinner and kept the house running and attended his work events with a smile. But emotionally, I withdrew completely. When he criticized how I folded the towels, I nodded and said nothing. When he complained about my inefficient grocery shopping route, I simply agreed. When he pointed out that I'd missed a spot while vacuuming, I thanked him for noticing. My responses became shorter, simpler, void of any real emotion. And I started spending my evenings in the small study at the back of our house, the one room Thorn rarely entered because he deemed it unnecessary space. I'd lock the door, turn on my desk lamp, and work until midnight or later. Some nights I didn't come to bed until 2 or 3 in the morning. Thorn noticed, but he didn't understand. He thought I was reading or watching shows or wasting time on social media. He had no idea I was building an empire. "What could you possibly be doing in there?" Thorn stood outside the study door one evening, his voice tight with irritation. It was 11:30 and I'd been working for 4 hours straight. Just catching up on some things, I called back. What things? You don't have a job. You don't have projects. What are you catching up on? I opened the door just enough to look at him. Personal things. That's not an answer, Alysindra. Are you talking to people online? Are you planning something? Planning what? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. His eyes narrowed. You're different lately. Distant. Negative. Are you trying to embarrass me? Are you complaining about me to your friends? I could have laughed at how completely wrong he was. Instead, I kept my face neutral. I'm not doing anything that concerns you, I said. I just need space sometimes. Space from what? From me. From our marriage. From criticism, I said quietly. He stared at me for a long moment, clearly not expecting that answer. Then his expression shifted into something familiar. Disappointment mixed with condescension. If you weren't so sensitive, he said, you'd understand I'm trying to help you. I closed the door. I hadn't always been planning this. 3 years earlier, when my grandmother died, she left me a small inheritance. $35,000. Not life-changing money, but meaningful. Thorne had looked at the check and shrugged. Too small to invest seriously. Just put it in savings. But I didn't. I'd been thinking about an idea for years. Something I'd studied in college, something I'd researched obsessively in my spare time. A gap in the market that nobody had filled properly. A solution to a problem that affected millions of people but was being ignored by major companies. I took that too small inheritance and I hired a developer. I paid for a prototype. I filed for patents. I built a website. I started reaching out to manufacturers. And I did it all silently, brick by invisible brick, while Thorne complained about how I stacked dishes. The inheritance became seed money. The seed money became a working prototype. The prototype became investor interest. And investor interest became something much, much bigger. The money grew slowly at first, then exponentially. By the end of year 1, I'd secured a small angel investment. $50,000 from a venture capital firm that specialized in emerging consumer products. By year 2, that $50,000 had helped me manufacture the first production run. The product launched quietly on a direct-to-consumer website I built myself. Sales were modest initially. A few hundred units a month. But the reviews were outstanding. People loved what I'd created. They left comments saying it had changed their lives, and they couldn't believe nobody had thought of this before. By year 3, the year Thorne's criticism reached its peak, I was doing 7 figures in annual revenue. 7 figures. And Thorne had no idea. He never looked at our bank accounts closely enough to notice the separate business account I'd opened. He never asked what I did with my grandmother's inheritance. He never bothered to wonder what I was building in that locked study. He was too busy pointing out that I'd used the wrong setting on the washing machine. Every insult became fuel. When Thorne told me I lacked ambition, I worked until 3 a.m. negotiating with new suppliers. When he said I was intellectually lazy, I spent weekends reading industry reports and market analyses. When he criticized my appearance at events, I used some of my growing profits to hire a brand consultant who helped me develop a professional image. Not for him, but for myself. The crueler he became, the harder I worked. I didn't work out of spite. I worked because his criticism had revealed something important. I'd been living small. I'd been hiding my capabilities. I'd been letting him define my worth. And I was done with that. Every time he opened that improvement ledger, I was building something he couldn't grade. Every time he scored my performance as a wife, I was creating a business he couldn't control. The ledger became my motivation in a way he never intended. Thorne's mother, Vervain, visited us in late summer. She was a sharp woman in her 60s, elegant and observant. I'd always gotten along with her better than Thorne did. He found her too traditional and overly emotional. We were having tea in the garden while Thorne was at work when Vervain set down her cup and looked at me directly. "My son is not treating you well," she said. I blinked, surprised by her bluntness. "He's just particular about things." "He's cruel," she corrected. "I've watched him criticize you 6 times since I arrived yesterday. The way you poured his coffee. The way you answered the phone. The way you laughed at something I said. It's not normal, Alysindra." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to defend him. Part of me wanted to agree with her. "He thinks he's helping me improve," I finally said. Vervain's expression softened with something like sadness. A man who belittles a woman fears her becoming someone he can't control. He's not trying to improve you, dear. He's trying to keep you small. Her words hit me like cold water. Keep me small. What should I do? Become too big to contain, she said simply. And watch what happens. Thorn gave me a compliment exactly once that year. We were at a colleague's party and someone mentioned a recent innovation in our industry, something technical that most people didn't understand. I'd been following the development closely for my own business reasons, so I explained it clearly, breaking down the complex technology into simple terms. The colleague looked impressed. You really know your stuff. Do you work in tech? Before I could answer, Thorn cut in. She's just well-read. Alysindra has always been surprisingly knowledgeable about random things. Surprisingly. Like my intelligence was unexpected. Random things. Like my expertise was scattered and meaningless. But later that night when we were driving home he said something revealing. You embarrassed me tonight, he said. Acting like you know more than the professionals in the room. I wasn't trying to embarrass you. Someone asked a question and I answered it. You made me look uninformed by comparison. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and I saw it clearly for the first time. He wasn't angry that I'd been wrong. He was angry that I'd been right. He was intimidated by my intelligence. And he'd been trying to bury it under criticism for years. The lock on my study door was a simple one. I'd installed it myself after Thorn started making comments about my secretive behavior. It was just a basic keyed lock, nothing fancy. I kept the only key on my keychain at all times. So when I came home from the grocery store one afternoon and found scratches around the lock and the door slightly ajar, I knew exactly what had happened. Thorn had tried to break in. I pushed the door open carefully. My laptop was still on my desk, password protected and untouched. My files were still locked in the cabinet. Nothing seemed disturbed, but the invasion felt physical anyway. He tried to break into my private space because he couldn't stand not knowing what I was doing. When Thorn came home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen. Did you try to open my study door? I asked calmly. He didn't even look ashamed. It's my house. I should be able to access any room in it. It's our house. And that room is mine. What are you hiding, Alysindra? What's so important that you need to lock me out? My privacy, I said. That's what I'm protecting. My right to have something that's mine alone. He stared at me like I'd said something absurd. Then he shook his head. You're being paranoid. I was just checking if the window latch was secure. The door must have been stuck. The lie was so obvious it wasn't worth challenging. I just nodded and went back to cooking dinner. But that night I installed a deadbolt. I wasn't supposed to hear the conversation. I'd come home early from a dental appointment and was putting my keys in the bowl by the front door when I heard Thorn's voice coming from his office. He was on the phone. The door was half closed and he clearly thought I wasn't home yet. Honestly, Marcus, I don't know why I'm still married to her, he was saying. She has no ambition. No drive. She just coasts through life doing the bare minimum. My hand froze on the key bowl. She's easily replaceable, he continued. I could find someone who actually challenges me intellectually. Someone who brings something to the table besides adequate housekeeping and occasional conversation. Easily replaceable. The words hit me like a slap, but I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't storm into the office to confront him. I simply stood there behind that half-closed door and let the words settle into my bones. Then I walked back outside, got in my car and drove to my lawyer's office. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard. Not Serena. Not Farane. Not my business partners or my lawyer beyond the general statement that I was considering my options. Instead, I poured everything I was feeling into my work. The business was at a critical juncture. We'd been approached by a major retailer about carrying our product nationwide. The deal would require scaling up production significantly, which meant more investors, more infrastructure, more everything. It was risky. It was expensive. Could fail spectacularly. I said yes. I spent the next 3 months working 18-hour days. I negotiated contracts, hired a production manager, secured a larger warehouse and coordinated with the retailer's buyers. Thorn barely noticed. He was too busy complaining that I hadn't been maintaining the garden properly and that dinner had been late twice that week. While he criticized my failure to deadhead the roses, I was signing a deal that would put my product in 1,500 stores across the country. While he lectured me about proper closet organization, I was being interviewed by industry publications about innovation in consumer goods. The wheel was turning, and he had no idea he was about to be crushed underneath it. The first rumor reached Thorne in October. He came home from work looking distracted, which was unusual. Normally he walked in ready to catalog whatever I'd done wrong that day. "Something strange happened at work," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. "There's talk about a new competitor entering our market. Some startup that's supposedly going to disrupt everything." Thorne worked for a major consumer products company, the exact industry I'd been quietly conquering for 3 years. "What kind of startup?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Nobody knows much about it yet. Very secretive. But apparently they've signed a massive retail deal, and their product is getting incredible early reviews. My boss is worried." "Why worried?" "Because if this company is as good as people say, it could cut into our market share significantly. We're having an emergency strategy meeting tomorrow to figure out how to respond." I nodded sympathetically. "I'm sure you'll figure something out." He looked at me, then really looked like he'd just remembered I was in the room. "You wouldn't understand the complexity of it," he said dismissively. "It's high-level business strategy." "Right," I said. "Of course." He walked away to change clothes. I smiled. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It was a thick cream envelope with gold lettering, addressed to me personally. Inside was a formal invitation to the annual Innovation Showcase, a prestigious industry event where major companies and promising startups presented their latest developments. I'd been invited as a featured presenter. Thorne picked up the invitation from the hall table where I'd left it. He skimmed it and laughed. "The Innovation Showcase. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel for presenters this year." "What do you mean?" "It's supposed to be for serious companies and innovators. Why would they invite random people?" He tossed the invitation back on the table. "Are you sure this isn't a scam? Or one of those silly events for hobbyists?" "It seems legitimate," I said carefully. "Well, even if it is, I wouldn't bother going. It's just networking theater. People pretending their small ideas matter while the real industry players watch and take notes." He shook his head. "Honestly, the fact that they sent you an invitation says everything about how far the event has fallen." I picked up the invitation and tucked it into my folder. "You're probably right," I said. 3 days later, I confirmed my attendance as the keynote speaker. The whispers started quietly, then grew louder. Industry publications began running teaser articles about groundbreaking innovation and a founder to watch. Business podcasts discussed mystery companies that were changing the consumer goods landscape. My company's name was mentioned occasionally, but always alongside others. My own name never appeared in the articles. I'd been very careful to maintain privacy, doing interviews only by email and keeping my photo off the company website. I wasn't ready to go public yet, but I was getting close. Meanwhile, Thorne's company was spiraling. The new competitor, my company, was taking more market share every week. Sales were down. Stock prices were dropping. Executive bonuses were being cut. Thorne came home furious one evening. "They're blaming us for not anticipating market shifts. How are we supposed to know some unknown startup would come out of nowhere with a better product?" "Maybe they were watching the market more carefully," I suggested. "It's luck," he snapped. "Nothing more. They got lucky with timing and probably with venture capital. It won't last. Companies like that burn out within a few years." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they saw a gap nobody else bothered to fill." He didn't hear the edge in my voice. He never heard anything I said unless it was agreement. The emergency meeting at Thorne's company happened on a rainy Thursday morning. I only knew about it because he'd mentioned it the night before, pacing our bedroom while I pretended to read. "They're bringing in external consultants," he said. "Calling in everyone from senior management. Apparently, the competitor situation is worse than they've been letting on." "How bad?" "We've lost 12% market share in 3 months. 12%. That's catastrophic." He ran his hands through his hair. "If this continues, there will be layoffs. Restructuring. People I've worked with for years could lose their jobs." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. I didn't want innocent employees to suffer. I just wanted Thorne to understand what it felt like to be underestimated. "The worst part," he continued, "is that nobody knows who's behind this company. The founder is completely anonymous. We can't even figure out who to target in our counter-strategy. He looked at me then, his expression almost vulnerable. I might lose my job over this, Alysindra. Everything I've built could disappear because of one person's idea. I set down my book. Then I guess you know how it feels when someone makes you feel small. He blinked, confused. What? Nothing, I said. I'm sure it will work out. Thorn became obsessed. Every evening he came home with new theories about the mystery competitor. He researched until midnight, trying to piece together information from public records, patent filings and industry gossip. He filled notebooks with timelines and connections. He made phone calls to contacts in other companies. He even hired a private researcher to dig into the company's background. I watched him spiral, working himself into exhaustion trying to identify his enemy. And the whole time I was sitting across from him planning the reveal. The realization started hitting him in pieces. One evening he was reading through the competitor's product description for the 100th time when he stopped. This is strange, he muttered. What is? The way they describe their product's core functionality. It sounds familiar. He scrolled through his laptop. This approach, this specific solution. I feel like I've heard about this before. Maybe it's a common idea, I offered. No, it's too specific. He kept reading, his frown deepening. And the founder apparently started this company 3 years ago. That timeline. He trailed off, lost in thought. Over the next few days he found more connections. The company's location was in our city. The patent filing dates matched a period when I'd been especially busy with personal projects. The product's target demographic was something I'd mentioned caring about years ago. Every detail he uncovered should have pointed him toward the truth. But his brain refused to make the final connection because it was impossible. How could his wife, the woman who couldn't chop vegetables properly, be behind a multi-million-dollar company that was destroying his career? The cognitive dissonance was almost beautiful to watch. The annual innovation showcase was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel. I'd been preparing for 3 weeks, rehearsing my presentation, working with a speaking coach, coordinating with my marketing team on the reveal strategy. The event was invitation only, attended by industry leaders, investors, journalists, and major company executives. Thorn's boss had received an invitation and had mandated that all senior management attend to scout the competition and gather intelligence. Thorn complained about going. It's on a Saturday. I could be doing 1,000 more useful things than watching amateurs present half-baked ideas. Maybe you should go anyway, I said. You never know what you might learn. He looked at me suspiciously. Why do you care if I go? I don't, I lied. I just think it might be good for your career to be seen taking the competition seriously. He considered this, then nodded. You're right. I should go. Show leadership. Exactly, I said. That morning I told him I was spending the day with Serena. Shopping and lunch. He barely looked up from his coffee when I left. I drove straight to the Grand Meridian Hotel and headed backstage. The showcase began at 2 o'clock. There were 6 presenters scheduled throughout the afternoon with the keynote speaker, me, closing out the event at 4:30. I watched from backstage as the other presentations happened. Good products. Smart founders. Enthusiastic applause. But I knew mine would be different. Mine would be the one people remembered. At 4:15 I walked to the wings of the stage. My marketing director gave me a thumbs up. My business partner sent encouraging texts. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my navy suit and waited. The event coordinator stepped onto the stage to introduce me. And now our keynote speaker. The founder of a company that has disrupted the consumer goods industry in just 3 years, achieving remarkable growth and critical acclaim. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Valemont Solutions. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the podium. Alysindra Varelian. I walked onto that stage to thunderous applause. And in the third row, Thorn's face went absolutely white. The audience gasped, but nobody gasped louder than the section filled with Thorn's colleagues. I heard one of them whisper, "That's Varelian's wife." Another voice, "She's the founder? She's the one we've been trying to find." But I didn't look at them. I looked directly at Thorn. His mouth was open. His eyes were wide. He looked like someone had physically struck him. I smiled, not cruelly, just calmly, and began my presentation. I talked about the gap in the market I'd identified. The research I'd conducted. The prototype I'd developed. The patents I'd filed. The investors I'd courted. The retailers I'd convinced. I showed sales figures. Growth projections. Customer testimonials. Market analysis showing exactly how much of Thorne's company's market share I'd taken. I presented for 45 minutes to a completely silent, riveted audience. When I finished, the applause was deafening. Reporters rushed forward with questions. Investors handed me business cards. Industry leaders asked for meetings. And Thorne just sat there, frozen, as his entire understanding of reality crumbled around him. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a suite at the Grand Meridian and spent the evening fielding calls and emails. Interview requests. Partnership opportunities. Congratulations from people I'd worked with in secret for years. Serena called, screaming with excitement. I just saw the news. You did this. You did this. Why didn't you tell me? I couldn't tell anyone, I said. I needed it to be completely separate from Thorne. Holy shit, Ally, holy shit. Thorne called 17 times. I didn't answer. He sent texts. We need to talk, come home. I don't understand what's happening. Why didn't you tell me? Answer your phone. I responded once. I'll be home tomorrow. The next morning I drove home. Thorne was waiting in the living room looking like he hadn't slept. I walked past him, went to his office and retrieved his improvement ledger from the drawer. Then I carried it back to the living room and set it on the coffee table between us. What's that? He asked, though his face showed he knew exactly what it was. Your ledger, I said. The one where you graded me like an employee. Where you cataloged all my failures and inadequacies. He said nothing. I sat down across from him. While you were writing down how I top vegetables wrong, I was building a multi-million-dollar company. While you were criticizing how I breathe in my sleep, I was securing patents. While you were telling your friends I was easily replaceable, I was becoming irreplaceable in an industry you couldn't crack. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. You never asked. You never wondered what I was doing in that locked study. You never considered that I might be capable of something beyond your grading system. Thorne tried to speak several times before words actually came out. I'm sorry, he finally said. I didn't. I never meant to make you feel small, I finished. Your mother told me that's what you were doing. Making me small. Keeping me contained. And she was right. I was intimidated, he admitted quietly. You've always been smarter than me. More capable. I see that now. I think I always saw it. And instead of supporting you, I tried to cut you down. Yes, I said. You did. Can we fix this? Can we start over? I looked at the man I'd been married to for 6 years. The man who'd turned love into criticism. Who'd made our home feel like a performance review. Who'd called me replaceable while I was building an empire. I don't think so, I said. Because even now, you're only apologizing because you saw what I accomplished. You're not sorry for how you treated me. You're sorry you were wrong about me. Those are very different things. He started to argue, then stopped. Maybe he finally heard what I was saying. Maybe he finally understood. What happens now? He asked. Now I file for divorce. I move into the downtown apartment I already leased. I continue building my company without someone telling me I'm doing it wrong. And you figure out how to live with the fact that you underestimated the wrong woman. For the first time in years, Thorne had nothing to say. I picked up my pre-packed suitcase from the hallway and walked out the door. 6 months later, I stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office. Valemont Solutions had expanded into 3 new product lines. We'd hired 50 employees. We'd been featured in major business publications. I'd been invited to speak at conferences around the country. My company wasn't just successful. It was transformational. It was exactly what I dreamed it could be. Thorne's company had restructured. He'd been demoted, though he'd kept his job. He was no longer the confident, controlling man who'd criticized everything I touched. According to mutual friends, he was quiet now. Humbled. We'd finalized our divorce a month earlier. Fair division of assets, though my business remained entirely mine since I'd built it before our marriage issues became legal matters. I didn't hate him. I didn't spend energy thinking about revenge or vindication. I just moved forward. Serena met me for lunch that afternoon. How does it feel? She asked. Being the person everyone underestimated? I thought about the question. About the locked study and the secret bank accounts and the 3 years of silent building. About the improvement ledger and the breathing complaints and the feeling of being graded daily. It feels like I'm finally the right size, I said. Not too small. Not too loud. Not too anything. Just exactly who I am. Which is. I smiled. Someone who built something extraordinary while everyone was busy telling her she was ordinary. That evening I got an email from a Fortune 500 company. They wanted to acquire Valemont Solutions. The offer was more money than I'd ever imagined having. I read it twice then closed my laptop. I wasn't ready to sell. This company wasn't just a business. It was proof. Proof that the woman Thorne thought was easily replaceable had become someone irreplaceable. Proof that quiet work was more powerful than loud criticism. Proof that underestimating someone isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. Because what I built in that locked study, what I created with that too small inheritance, what I accomplished while Thorne complained about vegetables and breathing and everything else, that became who I truly am. Powerful. Respected. Independent. Free. And Thorne would spend the rest of his life knowing he could have been part of something extraordinary. Instead he chose to be the man who graded the woman who would have changed his world. That was his choice. His loss. His lesson. And I walked away from it all without looking back.